opposite of thinking I'm Brian Wright. I'm the principal of Town Planning and Urban Design Collaborative, and helping lead the team of consultants that you'll be hearing and seeing spurring around in the back of the room there to help create a vision for the property for the future. Process. How many people have this is their first time to participate?
For this project.
Yeah, great. So the process here is hopefully different than what you've experienced in the past. It's what we've heard. Normally, when developments are being contemplated and planned, it's all happening in a secret layer somewhere. Here, what we do is actually before we start planning, we come and talk to all of you, and we until first night,
Thursday night.
Thursday night, we had our opening presentation where we talked about general planning concepts and philosophies. Where we learned about the property and conservation and these sorts of things. And then we had a hands-on workshop where everybody who was in attendance gathered around individual tables, and we had 10 different tables, and all the community drew their ideas for the property, what could happen here if they were developing it. And then everybody presented their ideas, and we gathered and collected, taking all those notes off the map, putting them in our hopper of good ideas. And then the next morning, we started drawing for the first time. And so it's a little unusual that the first time you all are meeting us isn't at planning commission or some, city hearing. Hopefully it's going to yield better results than we've had in the past, because we know first and foremost, when you say what you want here, the answer is nothing, please. Right? And so we've got that. And then we say, okay, well, we've heard that it's not possible for the city to buy the property and keep it in conservation. And we know that it's zoned commercial right now. And so it's safe to assume that someone will develop it at some point. The idea is that we hope to be able to be the ones to develop it and to do something that if you got to have development, that you at a minimum say, oh, that's not so bad. But hopefully you're like, wow, this is actually really good. I'm thankful they did this. And every other developer who comes down better do that process or what they did, or don't even come talk to us. So the process for these meetings is we have a topic. This one is conservation, sustainability, environmental, green, whatever that means to you. And we have a free form conversation. And is that Darth Vader?
I thought I did too.
Something about
I have RTP.
That's awesome. So anyway, so we'll talk about whatever it is you all want to talk about. These sessions, we are here to learn. So I've got a team of people probably out on the site or whatever, but we've got architects, we've got engineers, we've got landscape designers, we've got illustrators. Our artist is here is actually doing rendering, so you can see what we're thinking about. We've got planners, we have sustainability and stormwater specialists here as well. So there's some people who know very specific things about this topic. You're up in here. Emily, is it possible to make it cooler in here? Thank you. Like sometimes in the morning we come in and it's hot and I'm like fanning myself, and then by the afternoon we're like, what's that on? Anyway, so we hope that you'll teach us, because we know that you all are passionate about this place and have spent lots of time studying it. Probably, I know so more so than we have at this point. We will catch up to you hopefully, but I think that you all will have some things to teach us. And those of you who are intimately familiar with the site or around the site that is right now, if you have any, hey, this is really a cool feature that we sent on the site, make sure you take note of this or whatever. Those sorts of things will help. So maybe if we can do statistically, but maybe we'll do quick introductions, just like your name and if you represent a group or anything like that. So
my name is Pierce Harding, and I'm in Ocean Beach.
I'm John Ford, civil engineer with the team, and my focus is balancing placemaking with environmental sustainability.
I'm Carolyn DeWitt, resident here, live on Amelia Island, just off of Amelia Island Parkway on the southern end. I'm Jennifer Spitznagel, I live at Ocean Breeze on 14th Street.
Darth Vader. I'm Jim Tippins, and I live in Isle of May, which my lot backs up to this section right there. And I'm Randy, Isle of May.
Candy.
Randy, Candy, out of
I'm Denise Vinci, I'm a city resident and I'm the chair of the city planning advisory.
Victoria Robus, I'm a city resident and I'm a member of the City Planning and Advisory Board.
Charles Carlisle, I'm with Bristol Development Group. We're the developer.
Claire Morris, I'm with Town Planning and Urban Design Collaborative. Brian, as a project manager on the design side and specializing in urban design.
Amy Thompson, I'm also with Bristol Development.
city resident.
4 days. I live on Center Road. Property just across Jason. Lady Road.
Written by city resident. City, county resident, I'm sorry. I know where I am. And I'm a member of the city service.
City residents are all county residents too, so it's, you know, fair enough.
Jerry Brown, I'm a city resident.
Mike Ledovich, mayor of Virginia Beach.
Chad Scott, I'm a resident.
Dr. Donegan also is there tonight.
Jim Donegan, put Kathy down
Maybe
here.
it's on the calendar. Or we can pass this. Yeah.
Right, that's good architecture.
Jerry Grady, city resident.
Awesome. This is a great turn. I like this meeting we have most people here, so.
Just
We did talk about things.
Brian?
Just a housekeeping thing. We are recording this for those that aren't able to be here. Part of that is signing in on the sign-in sheet, and we're going to distribute these videos and the opening presentation for those that weren't able to make that to that email list.
If you've already signed into one, we need to sign it or just
Yeah,
anybody who's
I
missed.
think so. It's helpful to know who is able to attend, but we will
Including
send.
us? Or?
You don't count.
So yesterday we had 2 meetings. First meeting was about utilities and infrastructure, and the second meeting was about transportation. And so we heard from the community some of the concerns about, utilities, infrastructure, security. And so we looked into those issues. What I try to find in these meetings, especially on a project like this, because as I said, the first position is don't do anything, everybody have their druthers. And so I started looking at this, like, okay, well, if I live here next door or even anywhere on that, like, why would I want to move it on? So I think like, okay, what's in it for me? Right? And so I'm like, what are the problems that you have? What problems can we solve through this project? And sometimes you're like, there aren't any problems to solve from the development side of things. So maybe there's some amenity you can provide. Problem solving is the thing to get people the most excited. Amenities, somewhat better, but honestly, we heard when we were talking about the infrastructure issues and the drainage problems in this area. I'm really excited that the stormwater specialist in the city thought, because the property is as large as it is, and there are enough sort of surrounding drainage issues, that we could think about this property in a way that it provides some stormwater functionality for the adjacent properties. And that was great. So, the actual plan would might be able to help solve the problem. And the reason why he was optimistic about that is because the size of the property, most of the time, having development around here, it's something smaller on a smaller lot, or trying to do something big on a small lot or whatever. And here we have a large piece of property, and so we can think a little bit more regionally. The other thing that we were thinking about is knowing that, one, it's important to the community, but also to us as the development and design team. Conservation, and like, how sensitive can we be on this property? How much can we really be a model of development? What development is supposed to be, what you all probably have, besides not developing, what you have wished development would be when it does come to town. And so looking at having a conservation function, but then also, asking about parks and things that are nearby. It's like, oh, there's a park is off the map there, but closed, but it's not so great, it's not well utilized or whatever. And so, then we're thinking, well, in the conservation areas, could you make the park publicly accessible and make improvements and boardwalks and things, future wetlands and all of those. So like, maybe you're on the trail, and instead of just coming down the path, get to this property, kind of weave through the wilderness a minute and get back on the path and go down the way. And so some of those kind of things are the ideas and inspirations that we're looking for, and they pop into our head as we hear things from the community as important to you, it's concerning to you. And sometimes the community says, what if we did this? It's a great idea. So look at this as an opportunity to just share with us your ideas, your hopes and aspirations, as if you really had the magic wand and could make something happen here, assuming something's going to happen. And so I'm going to pause, just open it up to all of you. Share with us, who wants to go first? And I thought in this meeting it would be like everyone's hands. There we go. Yes.
First of all, thank you for what you're trying to do. However, I have to tell you,
Fair
I
enough.
feel like you're a wolf in sheep's clothing.
Yep.
And the
Thankful
only
stuff that I've
residents
heard
that I would
too.
like to see on those 3 adjacent properties are the wildlife that is currently there. As a member of the Florida Master Naturalist Program, I am really concerned about the conservation here and really want to see that preserved. I know the message has been loud and clear that we have no choice in the matter as far as the land being sold. We don't want you here. I have to be honest. And nobody has said that out loud.
I did. I said it in the very first
Okay,
presentation.
well, and then I'm reiterating.
Yes.
So that being said, we're having this forced on us. So I appreciate the fact that you are trying to take our ideas, but I really hope that you hear them. We don't need more residents on this island. We don't want to be another Hilton Head. We don't want to be Manhattan, which is almost the exact same size as this. And it's starting to get that way. I rode my scooter here and almost got hit 3 times. I mean, it's just not what it used to be. So please consider that.
Yes.
I'm gonna piggyback on her what you're saying. She decided to get shy.
Sounds like my sound machine tonight.
It's a Chuck Will widow. He's a member of the Bob White family. For years, we've been in our house now 14 years. That bird made its way all the way through here, all the way out, every morning and every evening. When they built Lakeside, it went away. I heard it. It's back. If I could lay down on the ground and say, don't chase this one bird. He's lonely. He's calling for that. But he's right. I hear him every morning. He's already gone, made his migration now. But in the spring and in the fall, he makes his migration for about 3 or 4 weeks. Some of you that live around there, hear it. Just for credit. So that was my conservation plan. There's wildlife, like you said, the understory of that, not just the trees. swallowtail kites, you know,
Know what I see flying around the airport?
yeah, somebody
They're
cut
migrating.
down a nest recently, you know, a tree that had a nest in it. But in my backyard feeders, I'll probably see 25 different species of birds back there. So it's just important that we find a way to be sensitive to it. So that, and one question about have you come to a meeting like this before and changed your mind about what you sort of brought in? Like you have some concepts, I know, but after meeting with people, have you as a team said, we're willing to change your mind?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, just a clarification for those who weren't here in the opening presentation. The extent of the concepts that you just referred to is development occurring on the property. The idea would be to have some commercial component. Right now, it's all zone commercial, but doing something that's sort of neighborhood serving commercial. So like if you live nearby, walk to the coffee shop or the oyster bar or whatever, something cool that you actually want. And we heard, you know, the Publix that people have been considering on this property, or parking lot, parcels, and so, you know, before we talked to the community, it was like, Publix, we don't know. And so we heard that the Publix was okay, it's fine, the Publix. You just not like groceries or what? It's like, no, we just don't like grocery like that. And so I said, what if it's like a neighborhood scale market where you could walk and get a few things that you need for ingredients that night, not your week's worth of shopping. So, yeah, that'd be kind of cool. And so that's a small example, but the concepts are literally just like the highest level, mixed use, neighborhood serving commercial, and some residential, though, you know, they said not residential. But until that first morning after the opening presentation, we had not drawn plans. And so that's where, and so as we hear this, as we're going through this process, like some of the things you were pointing out to us, we're taking note of on the aerials and the surveys, and how we're relating to, like the neighbor said, oh, and how they, would love to have a buffer there, and you know, this and that. So we're starting to think about, okay, well, how much room is there? How much is a reasonable buffer? Is it 10 feet, 1,000? Like, what does that look like? And so we're very, very specific.
So as a group, you are teachable and changeable in the midst of this
That's
process.
why we don't come with.
Well, that's where the suspicion comes,
Yeah.
because, you know, we've heard that song in the second verse.
Yeah.
And we want to know that we can step further with you and not beguile, I guess.
For sure.
And I guess all of us would just like that, we sign a paper that if we don't like what you've done, we buy our houses.
Yeah.
I want to move to Hilton Head and raise Canyon.
Or Manhattan. Yes.
I think if this property were developed, which I think would be unfortunate, I would hope that you would consider a development that's zero net energy. And I would hope that you would think about not just our environment right now, but what we will look like in 50 years. We're a barrier island. We have rising sea levels, we have rising temperatures, and we have more storms than ever. And I think you need to consider the future environmental impact, not just the environmental impact of today.
Yeah, we were looking at your resiliency report and noticing that as sites go, you know, this one's pretty good as far as sea level rise and some of those other factors that are taken into consideration. So I was glad to see that we weren't coming in saying, hey, we're in this really dangerous area. Let's do something great together, you know. So, but yeah, we are thinking through all that. So you and me.
Is there any way you could afford to do this just as businesses? I mean, no housing and, you know, office, doctor's office or whatever, would that be economically?
I don't know. What I do know is that, you know, as far as from the developer's perspective, that's not really what Bristol does. And so there may be, another group that would come in and develop this, just commercial. The thing that I would be concerned for you guys is I know what kind of where our head's at, where our heart's at for this property. And what I'd be concerned is we say, well, this doesn't work for Bristol, bummer. And then the Publix, where you get your whatever, and like, what a shame, and so that's the thing, like a lot of developers go, well, if you don't let us do what we want to do, then we can show you the bad stuff we're going to do, it's like, no, well, we want this to be an awesome project that does all these cool things, but it has to work within their business model. But fortunately, part of their business model for this project is being sensitive and doing something with community character, listening to all of you, going through this process and all of that. And so that's the kind of the tricky part.
And houses, that's part of the business model.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
just said that, but you didn't say that at the beginning, when somebody tried to ask what your plan, oh, no, that's not plan. Oh, what is it?
Oh, I thought I did. I'm sorry. In the opening presentation, I went through and I shared that as well.
Really,
So
Yeah, I mentioned what we thought the market opportunities were that night of the opening presentation.
right,
The
it's
same
not that
thing.
you couldn't just do it. Commercial buildings. in there, like,
Well, just my perspective, I've been an office developer, I've been a retail developer, I've been a multifamily and residential, single-family residential developer. The issue with office and commercial, just from my perspective, thinking about what you'd want is, those always come with large parking demands. And if you look at the way the typical grocery anchored center is done, the grocers insist on a big field of parking right in front of their store.
I'm not talking about grocery, but
Well-
we have a lot of different office places that are kind of hidden in the woods and just go in there and there's plenty of parking. It takes less parking than 400 houses. I don't think we need any more businesses or stores, but then we don't need more.
the reason why we're mentioning grocery is because we know that that's where Publix was looking initially. That's why we're keying in on that, because that was to us like, oh, wow, and they do so much market research and they're like, they're very scientific about where they pick a site. And if Publix is looking at it, then other of those types of places also, identify that as a beneficial location. That's the kind of thing. So 1 second.
Well, this kind of ties in with the previous two speakers mentioned, but okay, this may be high and dry as far as, sites go, but what about evacuation? Every 10 years or so, and have maybe more often, we have a mandatory evacuation here. How are we going to get all these people off the island?
That's a great point, and something that's not lost on us. At the end of the day, there are all the rules and regulations that any development has to follow in that regard. But as you add more people, and I know right now some of these problems like takes to evacuate right now. Yeah, and so when we do projects like this, because we work all over the country, and we work for cities as well as we do for development, right? So many times we're on the opposite side of this, and we're saying, hey, you're gonna play nice, and you're gonna do this and that and the other. We have to think about evacuation with massive control cities. And so one of the things I try to do when we do this process is to kind of share information, best practices and stuff from around the country. And one of the things that I'll say for all of you, independent of this project, anything else that comes in the future, anything consider retrofitting some of your existing neighborhoods to deal with this. The fact that you so often don't connect streets has caused the problem. You don't develop these cul-de-sacs all around and developing a suburban model. It means that now everybody who lives in Altamay has to come out on this one road, right? And so it's essentially one giant cul-de-sac whole neighborhood. You have many neighborhoods that are like that. And then you all are like, this traffic. And it's like, as I always say, you are your neighbor's traffic, right? And And so when we're looking at this, we're looking for how much connectivity can we have, where are the maximum number of places where we can connect in. So that people, not in an evacuation, just in an everyday moment, can move around in a multitude of ways. And so you're not putting all of your traffic on the intersection of Bailey Road and on down the Parkway. And, you know, I see the senior center there, same thing, you know, it could connect, and we understand that the neighbors actually wanted it to connect, but they didn't want to connect, and they were allowed to not connect. You know, most of the cities, we've already done the ordinance for as well. We require all streets to connect. It's just the way it is. I mean, I've heard a couple of times people talk about disconnecting all the streets that are already here because of people cutting through their neighborhood. And I'm thinking, can you imagine that same idea, that same mindset in downtown Fernandina? Well, it's a cut through. People are cutting through my street. No, it's just one of the streets in the network, right? And so as we think about this, that's one thing I'll share with you. If you want to not exacerbate this problem of traffic and evacuation in the future, make sure you're fanatically connecting all streets and even retrofit.
As a footnote, there's two ways on the island. It doesn't matter how fast we get to A1A. Right.
No, that's
There's 2
fair
lanes,
enough.
maybe 4 lanes, you know, proposal, but, you know, it's really people tunneling into this one.
That's fair.
So a couple of practical things that I think you should think about is as you're doing your topo and your site plan, and I know you're going to have to do endangered species, you have to look for tortoises and, you know, document all that. Some things to think about, I think, are wildlife corridors and some conservation area, either through conservation easements with the developers, the property owners, however it ends up. But I do think, and you're gonna have some wetlands in there. So I do think that you've got some opportunities to identify wildlife corridors, conservation opportunities, the use of conservation easements, which helps people's tax burden. And so I think those are all things that ought to be like put in the pot and thought about as you begin to lay this site out and see where you have opportunities for those things.
Very good. Thank you for mentioning that. For those who missed the opening presentation as well, I shared some of the initial things we had heard from community members that we talked with, like representatives from tree conservancies and the neighborhood associations, just in preparations, we'd have at least a little bit of a hint of what he was thinking about. We were totally oblivious. And so that got our gears turning a little bit. And so I'm trying to think about, you know, what are some of the things that we could do along these lines. And so the idea of, you know, creating a neighborhood that is essentially wildlife friendly, you know, so things like that.
But wildlife corridors are very specific.
Yeah, I'm just gonna say.
And-
be part of it.
And, you know, I had a deer run across in front of me on 14th Street just this week. So there are deer all over this island now. And other sorts of small mammals and coyotes and things. But
Everywhere.
so wildlife corridors, I think, are different than just saying, okay, we're all going to have Audubon, you know, backyards.
For sure.
So I think it's a very specific site design
Yep.
that y'all have to look at.
I totally agree.
I think it might be helpful for some people who weren't at some of those first meetings to understand that the thought is to come into the city with this project.
Yep.
And the requirements then that brings with it from a review process, that, you know, from a height, and just that it's going to be under the city development code, and that might sort of help understand some of the design features that might be looked at.
Yeah, so right now, 2 of the parcels are in the county and 1 is in the city. And so the idea would be, we've talked to the city and the county about, you know, what is the process, what's the preferred procedure, et cetera. And so it sounds like the way to do it is that you annex from the county to the city. And then you're under the city's jurisdiction for all the regulations, I think. So
And the reason you do that annexation is so you can get sewer and water. Because you get on city sewer and city water. Otherwise, you got septic tanks and wells.
So
Do
somebody,
not want.
1 second.
What would happen with,
Oh,
Okay.
okay,
And then, like, I was just
All right.
acknowledging that I see you, but I remember.
okay.
I'm terrible at this, by the way, so hopefully.
Oh, you're doing okay. You're good. First, you'll be surprised at what I'm about to say. And I promise you, I am not a plant. I've never met these people before or anything else. I, for 20 years, lived in a very small, very Amelia Island kind of feeling place, even though it was landlocked outside of Nashville, Tennessee. And you
I
folks.
was really suspicious because I'm here from Franklin. So,
Okay,
they're really.
and I know you have a project going there now, and I was there long before you guys came in and brought Tapestry into Brentwood. So if any of you have ever been to Brentwood, Tennessee, it is probably one of the most genteel, sort of frozen in time, very conservation-minded little area. And to a point where one of the reasons that I moved there initially, I was brought there because of work, but the reason I decided on Brentwood as opposed to Franklin or as opposed to Nashville and so forth was because they had a density requirement that there could not be more than one home per acre. And they still abide by that today. And there was absolutely zero multi-housing options there. But little by little, the commercial property, what very little there is in Brentwood. Has anybody in here ever been there? It's small. So, but lots of green space, probably one of the most green space conserved developments as an area that there is. I don't know what you're shaking your head about.
no, I'm saying that's not what Bristol does.
Okay, so, well, they're the ones that built this property I'm about to tell you about. So there were lots of people coming in wanting to build movie theaters and lots of other, Pier 1 and, jewelry stores and all this kind of stuff in this area. And so the folks from Bristol came in with Tapestry. And so it was a double whammy. Number one, if this was going to be the first multi-density property in this community, and traffic, what it was going to do to the green space, all these kinds of things that I'm hearing here were absolutely foghorn from the top of every home in this community. And it went on for a very, very long time. What I will tell you is that they did build their building. It's lovely. It was built in a way to assimilate into what little bit of architecture there was in the area. They actually solved a growing traffic problem because that big intersection that you are a little bit behind up there, which is Franklin Road and Maryland Way. And because of the way they designed it, and as they were saying, multiple ways to ingress and egress from their property that helped to actually disperse where people coming and going from that community, came in and out of the neighborhood. The other thing is they are connected into nearby that was already existing, kind of walk to the pet store, the liquor store, dry cleaning, stuff like that. And they also added a restaurant and I think something else there. So all in all, this very contentious, oh my God, this is the beginning of the end for Brentwood actually turned out to be a very slow, methodical, and friendly assimilation into this community. On the other hand, I also am aware of a place that you have in Charlotte, I think it is, maybe. No, the Velocity down in downtown.
In the
Nashville.
Gulch?
Okay, yeah, in the Gulch. So that one, very different. It's already very commercial. There's lots of other
Urban
buildings and
area.
shops and hotels and stuff primarily in that area. And that actually has gone fairly well too. I don't think you handled the traffic ingress and egress because of parking and what you were already limited to shoehorn into there very well. I will say one of the keys to the success of some of the other places that you've had seems to be the more you can do to encourage the residents that you do eventually bring there is that you create the opportunity to walk, to do a lot more of what they do, as opposed to traditional apartments and condos and things where almost everybody has to get in their car and drive, whether it's half a mile, 3 miles to get to what they want to do every single time they want to do something. And at least from what I have seen, and granted, it's a small experience from this big company, I would rate it absolutely an A-, where when it finally begrudgingly was passed and agreed to have happen, it, was thought to be just the beginning of the end. The only other thing I'll say is you bring up Manhattan. I don't know if you all are aware, but the fact that they put Central Park has made it one of the, if not the country's largest migratory bird location between Canada, Mexico, and South America in all of the United States, because it's such a green space where a lot above and around and everywhere is not accessible to these birds. And this has been sustainable for a long time. Any of you that are into birds and are birders, Central Park, New York City is one of the most highly conserved and sustainable bird environments in the entire United States. So this can happen. Eventually, somebody is going to build something there. And I personally would much rather have this be a collaborative process and at least try to what they're doing, as opposed to somebody else can come in here and buy that land. And as long as they're abiding by the legal rules that are available here, they can put whatever the hell they want there. And I would much rather try to work with somebody like you. So thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And at least I know of 2 examples where you did better more than harm.
Yeah, and just to your point, what Bristol does, we're looking at the webpage. I'm sure all of you have
It's
been
not
to
a good
Bristol's webpage,
experience.
right? Probably not what you're imagining for Amelia Island. And so I'm thinking like, okay, like when Charles first started talking to me about this, I was like, which of these projects are you thinking we're doing something like here? And he was like, none of them. And I said, okay, good. That's good. And there is one though, that's, what's it called? Vidalia or something. Vandalia. That's kind of neat, and it's really like the one very unique, different than everything else on their webpage. It's like these 17 little cottages, and each of them, they like all facing on these rain gardens and all this. I mean, I'm like, wow, that's we should put that on like the big splash, at least for this week.
Don't hide
it. But one of the things that I think I shared in the opening presentation was when we were talking about this project and how unique it was and how special the site is and how cool Amelia Island is and all of those things that you all already know. But as people come away, it's not lost on us. We're talking about this opportunity. I said, tell me about your career, Charles. Learning more about him, and I like people's friends who are at least a couple of years older than me. And he said, I'm explaining all of his path that where he is today. And he said, I'm just one in my career where I don't want to just do one more project for another project. I want to do things that are really interesting, excited about, that are special. And I thought, okay, goodness, because if we come in here with anything less than that, then yes, somebody can come in and do whatever they want as long as they follow the zoning. And, I was even looking at the, once I heard that Publix was looking at this, I was like, can they do that here? And apparently, I think it can meet the rules and regulations under the current commercial zone. And so, those are the kind of concerns that I have. But I was happy because we work for all different kinds of developers around the country, and not all of them will just start to the point in their career where they're looking to do something special. And I'm not going to like brag to do something special. So I'm encouraged, and again, you all are just getting to know us, and hopefully each day, those who are coming back are gaining some more credibility and some more trust. And but I got a newspaper article I saved when I was working in Chestertown, Maryland, 300-year-old city or something. And the newspaper reporter said, "Yeah, we've got this snake oil salesman in town here trying to convince us to like all we're doing." Okay, so I'll be all worse, but that's okay. So yes.
I'm looking at your Redwood Town Center, and you developed this on approximately almost 7 acres of land. You put in 400, almost 400, 393.
What are you looking at?
Your Redwood.
This
That
tapestry,
tapestry.
Brentwood that
I'm
she
sorry,
just.
you put in almost 400 units that would mean for the city of Bernardino Beach, we would have probably a minimum of 800 new people living on this island, which we will have to provide all the infrastructure and services for. This 4-story building that you put up at this tapestry is to me a huge eyesore to our island. We have small buildings, low buildings, and we don't want every piece of the surface of our island covered with concrete driveways, buildings. So there's where I'm a little upset when I look at this. It's pretty, but I don't believe it's Amelia Island.
May I interject
please.
just very briefly? I don't want to take away time for comments. We'll stay overtime if we need to. But we don't have any intention of building anything that looks like Tapestry Brentwood in Amelia Island. It fits very well in that context. It's perfect for that context. And this is the project the lady over here was mentioning. First of all, we are not a very big company. We have 15 people that work for Bristol. We turn out maybe 3 projects a year that are new ones. We've done everything from 1 unit to the 20 units that Brian mentioned, to 40 that we have under construction now, to I think the largest we've ever done is the one that you just mentioned. Oh no, there's a tower in downtown Nashville that's a little bit.
This lady said that it was built in a small town, similar to what she described Amelia Island. That seems to me, when you're putting a structure for that many people
But
on a
that's
small
their
island.
downtown area.
Excuse me?
That's the downtown area of
No,
Brent.
this is. a
Of
building.
Brent, no, it's the downtown area of Brentwood.
Right, which is
So-
very small. It's pretty much one intersection, but he's
Well,
correct.
again,
because-
do we want an additional 800 people living on the island?
We're
And
not-
providing schools, ambulances, fire, all those services, so that you guys can make a bundle of money. I'm sorry,
I think
that's
that-
not something I like.
I think I agree. I think probably everyone in the room would agree with that, if they looked at that picture. So I think the reason she mentioned that, the point of it was that it was a contentious thing in Brentwood that everyone was freaking out about. And once it was done, people were okay with it. And so I don't think it was, I think your analogy was to say, we should put that
No.
over here. It was.
I was gonna say they
the
came to
concern.
an agreement of what worked for that community in that space without drastically changing the impact of putting something there, because there were other options of people that were looking at, 700 units, 600 units. I mean, they don't have the height restriction there that we have here. So all I'm saying is they might possibly end up doing something with 50 units or 40 or 20 or whatever. That would be better than somebody coming and putting in something on that space, which there could be hundreds of units. So don't literally take that as an example. They're gonna pick that up and recreate it here. All I'm saying is they appear to design to the space they're trying to assimilate into instead of blow up. That's all.
What is the minimum residency that you're looking at, that you need to make it feasible?
I don't have a number yet. We will have the number that we're able to lay out on here at the closing presentation. So we haven't been given any marching orders or instructions from Charles. So we're trying to figure out kind of like what is that minimum number we can get in here, because we know that the lower the number, the better from y'all's perspective.
Yes.
But also from the development company's perspective, it's got a pencil. So stay tuned Monday night.
So Charles, y'all did market research before you did this? Maybe
Well,
before you showed up here?
We did.
Yeah, so who's your target market for these residential units that are going in here? Are you focused on empty nesters? Are you focused on young people with families? I mean, are you focused on second home people? I mean, who is your market that you think you can sell these units to?
It's a good question. I think in maybe I put this in order of size of the market. I think there's a significant market. Well, actually, this ties back into this Brentwood. Again, not what we're proposing, but Brentwood is a town that had aged in place for a long time. And there were a lot of people who wanted to stay in Brentwood, but were no longer able to keep up their single family home for all the maintenance and things that are
The
required. when you're a
required
home-
acre, and I would say most of
So
the homes
that's
there,
really,
2 acres. or
so
more.
I understand that, and that's really interesting, but I really would like for you to talk about what your market research showed you for here.
Well, similarly, that there would be a component of people who have either aged in place here and are looking for a simpler lifestyle, or people who have just moved here that are looking for a way of living that doesn't mean you have to maintain a big home, but where the finishes and amenities and features of the housing are similar to what you might find in a condominium or a single family home, so that it's a comfortable place to live and an exciting place to live. So I think that, let's just say 50 and older population, we're not thinking at all about an age restricted kind of community, but I think there's a very good market opportunity there for people in that category to live, either in the kind of traditional apartment flats or perhaps in single family homes. It could be townhomes, it could be nicely done duplexes, or it could be detached single family homes. I think the other, maybe the second opportunity would be for people who are in a younger age demographic, and we always mix, we have a wide variety of people in age groups and other, demographic factors that live in our communities. But I think people who are younger, either work on the island, work in Jacksonville, but want the Fernandina experience, would be able to rent an apartment here, certainly, and live here. And then we usually find in between those two, the sort of the oldest demographic and the youngest demographic, or everybody in the middle, makes up the remainder of the people who live in our communities. But is that enough of an answer?
Maybe. Not really, but, so you're saying that the majority of your market is, you're focused on over 50?
I wouldn't say
Empty
necessarily
nesters?
majority, but certainly the largest of each of, if you broke the demographic groups.
So do
into-
you have the demographics broken down?
we've got data on what the existing demographics are, but not, we always guess what they would be for our communities. And if I had to guess here, maybe we'd have 40%, as high as 40%, 50-year-olds over. But
So your other idea is you'll have some rental and then some homeownership.
we're open to either form, but one of the more interesting opportunities right now is doing traditional single family homes, but providing them for rent, because there's a large market of people who no longer want to own a home, have a mortgage, but would rather, if they can get the same quality home and rent it.
And then you're talking about zero lot line, where there's little to no yard maintenance.
Not necessarily zero. I think we could do detached single family homes with garages on smaller
Right.
lots.
Okay. All right.
So the one way to not have to have maintenance is to use native landscape too.
Right.
To preserve that, so it looks awesome. You feel like you're still in the woods, but you're not having to. Notice a lot of the neighborhoods around here have lawns, it's like, some people love cutting lawns, but not a lot of people do these days, so.
That's why there's so many lawn maintenance companies on the.
Yes.
Yeah, probably whistling in the wind, but as far as rental apartments, I think one of the big problems we also have on the island is affordable housing for our workers. And I'm not talking about when they develop village apartments, which is basically for people 55,000 or a year. But if you've got some consideration from the county for tax and whatnot, perhaps making some apartments that were affordable for people who need something that's under $1,000.
We've actually been, we've heard that that's an issue here. We've been exploring, what are the opportunities to try to get workforce housing as a part of the development. And so looking at what programs are available, and also are there examples around to accomplish that? Well, guidance.
In terms of recent workforce housing, we have, it is, as an example, that is not an example of housing, so it is really market rate. Because once you do the calculation, there are set federal standards for how you calculate that. It ends up being like market rate housing, which does fit a need that we clearly have identified in the community for service workers, school teachers, EMS, that type of area, but it is not under the
Right. Programs for workforce health.
no.
It's all about affordable. And that's so one of the issues we have around the country is this missing middle concept. And so we focus on that all over the country, and but it's been identified as an issue, but it hasn't been, there are not programs to support it. But sometimes, like in the cities we work, we were doing the downtown and waterfront master plan in Burlington, Vermont, and they had a requirement just locally that all new development had to have like 14% affordable housing. They had been there for a while, and it was very successful. They got a lot of affordable housing units, but the developers, in order to make the numbers work, had to offset that with in houses. And so, like the people who, the example I was joked about was our client, the planning department couldn't afford to live in the town. We were working this planning for her because she made too much to live in affordable housing, but didn't make enough to live in a penthouse. And so,
Right, but I think you all are smart.
yeah, right. Well, we can make trails. I do know that. Like we're into. I mean, if we can, let's do it. So, yes.
Oh, so my understanding is these are not apartments or houses that people will buy. You will be renting them out.
I think I heard Charles say it's.
I think that would be more likely than not, yes.
More likely rental.
What level are we talking about? Or what amount of money would, whatever, 1 or 2 bedroom apartment, what are you talking about rental wise?
Usually, if we do rental apartments, it's a little higher here on the island because all of the impact fees and utility fees and things are much higher here than they are in the typical community. But we usually would have apartments that are in the $1,200 a month to $1,500 a month range at the lowest end. And I think here that's probably about the case. You'd have maybe 1,400
And the high end?
14 to 1,500, which means a person that made $55,000 to $60,000 a year, if you use 35% of income for housing costs, could live there and not be stretching their budget. At the high end, I can't say today because it'll depend on, but if we did detached single family homes, which would be the most expensive things to build, I don't write this down and say this is what you said these would rent for, because I don't know for sure. But I would guess maybe as much as $3,500 a month or so for something like that.
Can we move on to conservation?
No, that's a good idea. Well, see, that's the thing with these meetings. It's great. They kind of go where they want to, but somebody always is remembering why we came. So thank you for that. Like I said, I'm not the greatest at facilitating these meetings. Yes, conservation. Do you have a conservation thought, or you just were bringing us back to
I
reality?
just want to bring
Okay,
it back to.
great. Conservation. in the
When
back.
you finish, you got all these wildlife tracks and fish and all. If you could advertise so that people who go to buy their rent there want to live where there's wildlife, because up at the plantation, people are all up in arms with this coyotes and kill their children or whatever. People kill every snake that comes along, and it's benign, and if you could have signage and, the sign, the agreements, be aware there might be an alligator in your backyard, please don't freak out, they're probably not puke or whatever.
Okay, really, your dog.
Sure, ask for an actress
team, I'll take all the sides.
Yeah, no, I totally agree because when I realized that the airport was right next to our site, I was like, okay. So we're gonna have to market this to airport enthusiasts, absolutely, I was kind of joking around, and then I met somebody yesterday who lived in the neighborhood just down where at the beginning of the flight path where all the students are, and I was like, oh, you live right there. And I heard some people concerned, and we met with the airport director, and I get called all the time, they're complaining about the airplanes, and I said, did they not realize there's an airport there? They've been, and I said, well, I guess I just didn't think about it. And so I asked this guy, I was like, so how about that airplane noise? He's like, oh, I love it. And I realized he had on that like aviator hat, and his wife was like, yeah, every time a plane goes over, we gotta like walk over and look and see what kind it is, we note it. And so it's like, self-selecting clientele, but to your point, from my perspective, the way that I always think about, creating a neighborhood or something, it's like, you want there to be the story to be deep, right? If you're just going like, oh, we've got the coolest finishes, the best countertop, like that's pretty superficial, right? And so the more that we can have where we're like, yeah, this community is about these things, these principles. So we this is not just a wildlife friendly community, but we are, in the flight path of the
What was the word?
Well, Chuckwood Willow.
Chuckwood Willow.
Will Widow. You got
Chuck Will Widow in the Bob White family. And, and we created, the habitat is contiguous, and now they're able to migrate, and we can hear it again and listen to this. It's playing in, the office when someone comes into it. And, we're doing dark skies. And so if you're a stargazer and, what those kinds of things, like that's where like you're bringing the people who really want to be there for the right reasons. And because to your point, if we can serve and they're like, this stupid turtle keeps digging a hole in front of my, let's go move him over there. And they don't understand, right? Then we haven't fully accomplished the mission, right? And so I'm totally with you. And I think it just makes the place more interesting, the people become more interesting. And also, as I said, we want this to be a model, right? And so people can come and see, like, that's how, if you're going to develop in a place where people don't want development, that's very sensitive. This is what you need to do around the country. So I'm with you. Absolutely.
I would say that this area is small. It's going to be sacrificed anyways. Whatever you say here, there's nothing binding you to any of this. So we can wrestle over one tortoise or one tree or one bird, and I would love to do that. And I think there's a place for that. But this area is going to be developed. It's going to be sacrificed. It's across the street from a monstrosity already. So the idea that this is some sort of meaningful habitat is really foolish, honestly. What I think would make a statement about your commitment to conservation would be some sort of, let's call it what it is, a payoff. There's a land conservation organization in the area called the North Florida Land Trust. I think if you made a meaningful donation to them, and I'm not talking $20,000, I'm talking $1 million. I know the city wants to rehabilitate the tree canopy. I think if you made a donation of trees or money for trees, and again, I'm not talking 500, 1,000, I'm talking 25,000, that would be placed around the island to say, hey, we are exploiting and abusing and sacrificing this parcel of land. In exchange for that, we are going to provide dollars for North Florida Land Trust to buy area here around the island or elsewhere that is going to cover up for our sin. And similarly with all the trees you are necessarily going to take down to say, hey, we are trying to atone for our sins on this property by placing thousands of other trees on the island to make up for it.
I need to go look on their webpage and see how their marketing materials are set up. That's an interesting marketing campaign if that's what it says. But I get what you're saying in general, and we'll need to look into that. I have more hope for this site because I know that when you're looking at only 45 acres or so, say, well, how much habitat is actually there? How many special birds or salamanders or whatever are really there? I worry that if we take that perspective every time, that you eat away at it little by little until there's nothing left except for just these big wildernesses elsewhere. And then those who, humans are interacting with nature, right? And so we're part of the environment. And so there are these moments, these places that we call towns and cities and villages that we come together. If we can do it right here and not just sort of wipe it out and sort of do something elsewhere, maybe it's a combination of both. But I hope that we can afford just sacrificing.
I do too, but the history of development in Florida shows you're not going to.
Fair enough. You can't argue with history. So all we can do is show you with our actions. And hopefully we'll prove you wrong. Yes.
Yes, I was thinking of, this is like probably totally off topic, but it does speak to open spaces. You mentioned parks at the very beginning, and the thing is that parks, that sounds to me like destroying the underbrush, and that is bad for the wildlife. So do we need yet again another park? You know, there's plenty of parks around, and they're all within 5 minutes drive and or walkable. They can walk to Simmons Road Park. It's it's a nice in theory, but in fact, we need to keep the underbrush. We need to keep the native vegetation more than we need another park, in my opinion.
Yeah, and just to clarify too, I use the term park loosely just then. That's a great distinction because parks and open spaces in general ought to have different manifestations depending on where they are in the community, right? And so if you're in an area that you want to be conservation, having a grassy lawn out there, you could throw a frisbee or something probably isn't the appropriate manifestation in that regard. And so, what I'm thinking more is having conservation land, making it accessible via boardwalks and trails and things. That's what I was referring to when I said park. But some people I know take an extreme position and say, well, if you're doing habitat, then we don't get to go in at all. We don't get to go around the edges. So I'm not sure where you all fall in that regard. But I know that some of the neighbors who are around here, as we talked about this idea of being able to kind of walk through the trails in the wooded area, we're pretty excited about that. So
this is kind of a generic statement, and I don't know how exactly you would quantify this, but right now, I enjoy mental health because I hear more nature than I do cars, trucks, lawnmowers, stuff like that where I live. And I have that tranquility in my life because I'm hearing natural sounds, and no car makes me tranquil. So if there's a way to quantify that somehow and have a ratio where whatever it is you're coming up with keeps nature around to where nature is living and viable where we live, it's something that I think should be in every development, and certainly here on the island, because that's what brings us here, that's what we enjoy. That's what makes it, at least for me. So I'm sure other people have other ideas about that, but once I start hearing more people noises than animal noises, you lost me.
that's a great point. It's funny too with this site, because we have proximity to the airport. I was thinking that the biggest concern was going to be the airplane noise, but what I realized was the time at the Humane Society was the real noise pollution there. It was like, wow. It's like,
Ryan, we were one of those families that bought knowing it was an airport.
yeah.
I hear the airport use that language a lot. What we didn't expect was how aggressively they want to grow. We didn't buy for them to become a training center for young pilots or for landing planes and helicopters at 10 o'clock at night. It was a local airport access for people who were coming here for business or for vacation, not a training center, not a satellite for other. And the airport has growth on its mind, acquisition of growth. And I love it. I watch the skydivers. I just don't want lawn darts in my yard. So,
Well, I don't know if you all probably know this. the ball fields that are there kind of at the pleasure of the airport. And, you know, they're slated for future expansion of the airport or hangars or whatever the case may be. When we first were looking at the site, I was like, oh, that's cool, there's ball fields there. We can like embrace them, and, you know, maybe we can face them, and, you know, like to watch ball games or whatever. And I learned that they might come in the hangars at some point, so. Yes.
Does this development company have any previous experience or commitment to things like solar panels, electric vehicle charging stations, smart home technology, recyclable water, things like that that would really make a significant environmental impact?
Trying to keep track. The answer was yes to everything except one of the things that you said we've done.
Solar panels.
Yeah, we have looked at solar panels. We've also looked at geothermal energy for air conditioning and things. And we have a community that we are finishing now in a community that is all geothermal. So yes, we're always looking at those kinds of features. And one of the reasons we do that is because that's what our residents expect. So it's not only good for the environment, but it's good for us because it makes people want to come live there more often.
And the cool thing, you may know this already, but with the geothermal, you don't have all the outdoor compressor and the fans and all the everything here. So often there's an air conditioner cuts on. We had in my house, we have, you know, thermostat, I can control on the phone. So every time we're sitting out in the courtyard and it goes off, shut off. We can hear each other. I wish I was geothermal. So.
So I don't know if you guys have worked with the IGA before, the International Dark Sky Association, but I think not only with conservation, yes, the community and bringing in like-minded people that care about conservation, I think there's a great opportunity to make this like a dark sky certified community, which means like bringing lighting into code to decrease light pollution, which helps the birds stay in the area. It helps crime as well, and also helps save lives. So I think that could be an incredible opportunity, because I helped with that in Central Florida. We started one of the first Florida dark sky communities, and it was really popular with the people that lived there, and brought in more people to it. Not necessarily leaning towards it here, but all the other stuff.
I don't know about that certification. We're going to look into that, but the geothermal community I was talking about is a dark skies community as well. And it's a wonderful concept.
What's the name of that community?
Norton Commons. It's in Louisville, Kentucky.
Oh, Norton, okay, yeah.
So you mentioned a lack of lawn, and I think anything you could do to get rid of grass, because when you've got grass, you've got excess water, pesticide, fertilizer, herbicide, lack of native plants, noise pollution, like this lady said, that this island is, the background noise is weed whackers, lawnmowers, and leaf blowers. And it's a shame. It's an unpleasant place to live during the day when all of these landscaping companies are terrorizing the neighborhoods with their motorized equipment. So, you know, if you were to create a community that had no lawn, period, and I know that's something that is taking place more in the West because they have so much trouble with water issues, but here as well for a variety of issues. I think if you were to plan a community that had zero lawn, and that would be a great objective.
That's good. And, you know, one thing I would also encourage, I've noticed as we've been touring around and going to the different neighborhoods, is that most of the neighborhoods that I see are very conventional in their approach to pretty much everything. Lawns and all of that.
A lot of the HOAs won't let you have less grass.
Exactly. So maybe as we're going through this process and we have these best practices and, you know, techniques, and we say, maybe you all consider adopting them in your neighborhoods as well, so you can actually come sort of closer into compliance with the things that you all are passionate about. I know with HOA, it's hard. You have to get everybody to agree to change the bylaws or something. But it would be a pretty awesome statement. You guys said, you know, we're so into this. Yeah, we actually wanted to make sure that the new development was showing us up.
We just went through that in my neighborhood with the HOA, and our lawn was the first one that has no grass, and it was a little sad at first because it was so green and beautiful, but it's real. We're starting to get used to it.
So I'd like to bring it back to conservation, because as the mayor of the city, conservation is one of our top goals. You've got 48 acres, so I'm not hearing, well, we're gonna commit 10%. Of 5 acres, we're gonna commit 20%, 9 acres. I'm not hearing any commitment to preserving what percentage of acreage of this pristine land are you gonna keep pristine? And I can tell you my experience at Simmons Road Park. I go to the Gens. That was 6 acres. We're gonna make this a nature walk. Well, they destroyed all the underbrush. They took out trees. My wife and I walked it last Saturday at 9 o'clock in the morning, because the sell was you'll walk and enjoy nature. We didn't see one bird. We didn't see one turtle. We didn't see one rabbit. Didn't see a squirrel. The only wildlife we saw was a mosquito on her nose. And so if you plant trails through this, the same thing will happen. Yeah, you're preserving the vegetation, but you're preserving the vegetation, you're disturbing the wildlife. They don't come back. I mean, to go through 6 acres of land and not see one bird, really? So as mayor, at some point, I'm gonna want to know, what is your commitment to conservation? What is that number?
For sure. I would expect nothing less from all of it. I think the reason that I'm not telling you the number right now is because I have no idea. I don't want to say, oh, it's 20%, and then we end up with 50%. We're like, wait, you told us 20, we want 20. But honestly, though, I mean, it's like when we're going through this process, the plan is truly unfolding right now. And so to make an arbitrary number, like we know you guys have this 25-foot buffer around wetlands that's required. More. We have a buffer that's bigger. It's 25 feet, the scientific number that we, so if I say, well, we're gonna preserve all your buffers, yeah, well, of course we are, but we may do better. So that's, yes, sir.
I'm not trying to be sarcastic, serious question. So I went to the site yesterday, and I went deep into the site. My question is, raise your hand if you like mosquitoes.
Yes,
They're all
because they're
feast
part of the
eaters.
ecosystem. How can you not like mosquitoes?
But how do you, so on your property, do you spray for?
No.
No.
On my
Spray for
property,
plants.
I plant native plants because I'm planting insects, because birds don't go to Chick-fil-A. Okay, they eat insects. So if you're complaining about there being a lot of insects on that property, that means there's a lot of life on that property. I don't want to jump ahead. I don't know where you're going with this, but do I like mosquitoes? Yes. Do I like snakes? Yes. Do I like bats? Yes. I like all of those things because they are part of a ecosystem.
So 40 years ago, they sprayed terribly for gnats, which, they're alligators with wings this size. They sprayed terribly for gnats in South Georgia and here, wiped out the shrimping industry for about 10 years. Because the shrimp eat the larvae of these insects in the marsh and all that. And they kind of went, oh, they quit doing that kind of work, and our shrimping has responded in our area. So it makes a difference. I could spray mead and not have to spray my yard.
Yeah. When we were talking about mosquitoes and standing water out there and stuff, and I said, when you live here, I think you just are used to it, right? I mean, that's just maybe you become a you don't itch anymore. I don't know. It's like, at some point, it's just like, yeah, that's part of being on Amelia Island or any place like this. And like you go to Charleston and you see them, and it's like, that hurts, but that's it.
We just give them a punch of a Red Cross card.
Right.
Yeah.
I just wanted to piggyback on the gentleman from Colorado, it appears, or a fan of Colorado. Please don't be too quick to kind of dismiss the point that he made about there's only going to be so much, no matter what you do, because of what the mayor said, even if you make a commitment to trails or even areas of habitat where nobody's gonna be able to go, so it's friendly to the ecosystem, the investment to be made in these other areas that are already established and so vital to this ecosystem is actually kind of a good one, because no matter what you do, at the end of the day on there, you may be able to preserve some sort of friendliness to that, but if you can, in a sustainable way, with the equivalent of a 50-year endowment kind of effect, type of thing that's going to keep fueling the tree canopy or whatever other areas we've already designated as protected, the island, the city, the county, there has to be a collaboration here that we're not going to be able to keep all development and growth away. It's just not going to be that way unless there's drastic changes at both the city and the county level that just says absolutely moratorium and no more development, and take a look at what that does to your taxes. There are places around here that have been able to institute that type of thing. But the reality is, if you make the investment of, do you think back when Central Park was initiated, they ever thought that was going to work in terms of creating a truly sustainable habitat for a ton of life there, but that also human beings can enjoy? So, but it's because it's so massive, and there is no way that's ever going to change. The Central Park Conservancy is so well endowed, and anybody who puts two twigs together or a brick in anything on Manhattan Island has to contribute ongoing for the life of that building into Central Park Conservancy. So there is a way that you could do that in multiple areas on the island, and anybody who builds here, owns here, lives here, pays money here for anything, continues to sustainably contribute to that. I think your idea is really got merit, and there could be a compromise there, but I honestly feel no matter what you end up doing here, we can try to minimize some of the impact in terms of how many people, and there will be some displacement, like you said, there's gonna be, it's not 100% net new body coming into whatever he puts there. But this thing of preserving other areas that we can into perpetuity, that your benefits, the money that you're going to make, help to fuel that fund and make sure that no one can encroach on it ever, and that it's fueled with more trees, more water, more whatever it is that needs to be there to sustain it. I would love to put a huge vote in that direction.
To your point about if we have trails or boardwalks or whatever go through there, that we would lose the wildlife. I will say that I just got back from Croatia a few weeks ago, and I was at the falls, it's amazing waterfalls, trail. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Natural Site. It's unbelievable, and it has hundreds of thousands of tourists teeming through there, a year. And as I'm walking down the trail with my family, all of a sudden I hear something bounding through the underbrush right next to me. All of a sudden a small frog hops out, and I'm thinking that was a lot of noise for a small frog. And shortly behind the small frog is a snake chasing him, and the snake proceeds to take him and drag him off and proceeds to
Explain
There's
that
a
to
frog
your-
screaming.
explain that to your kids.
Yes, it was awesome. It was like, it's so cool. And I was like, oh my gosh, I cannot believe that just happened on this trail where a bunch of people walk by before me and coming after me, and yet it's still happening right in front of my eyes. So I'd be interested to know kind of what's going on at the place that you described earlier in the birds. But I think whatever we do, and one of the things we're learning about more now are your actual regulations, your requirements, right? So we see the tree preservation requirements. We hear you every time we're talking with people and we've been researching and learning more about, the idea of the understory and mid-story, preservation and all of these things. But so far, I haven't seen that, in the regulations. And so, maybe that needs to get added to the regulations. Maybe we can help show how that needs to happen. And then also, if we want to keep people out of the natural conservation areas, then sort of putting that in the regulations. And I say that it begins to work for cities as well. So I'm thinking of, in the future, how do we not have to come ask for these things or be perturbed when it doesn't happen? You just put it in the regulations and there you go. So it's.
So, in response to this lovely lady that talked about Central Park, I just moved from New York City. I've been in New York City for 75 years. I lived across the street from the Metropolitan Museum of Art, half a block from Central Park. Central Park has no wildlife. It has pigeons, it has squirrels, and it has rats. And of course, it's got lots of people like me that walk their dog to pee every day. But there's no wildlife left in Central Park. It's gone. And all of the rodents, the rats and the mice, have now moved into all the apartment buildings in New York City. They live in our walls because they have no place else to find food. So it's not a paradise when you get rid of all nature, your foxes, your deer, all the normal that you end up with just these little annoying things like squirrels and rats and mice.
One of the, again, I can't resist my work with cities. So we're working in Pinehurst, North Carolina. We're golfers, we're Pinehurst. We're doing the master plan for the whole village. Historic, and by Olmsted, we planned Central Park as well. And so as a planner, I was like, wow, this is really an honor to be kind of following his footsteps working this. And so primarily, to your point about, who are you looking to attract here? Similar demographics that you have here. You have an older population, higher needs than the average, and so we were doing the presentation, talking, and a woman stood up and said, "I moved here 2 years ago, and I did not move here to see this place change. We don't want any growth." And so then I went through this process, and I said, "Okay, show of hands. How many people have been here 5 years? People 10 years? Put your hand down if you have been there." So we go through, and we get to the end, and there's a woman who lived there for 60 years. And I said, "Okay, now all of you have to turn to her and say, thank you for letting me come." And so it's hard for me as I go through this process, and I hear the concerns and I understand them. But nearly every person that I talk to, except a few, tell me that they're new around here. And there's this interesting tendency that we have today that we didn't used to have, where when we come to a place and we've settled as a pioneer, or we've come afterwards, and we then say, that's enough. Let's take the snapshot of this place and stop. And I think about the examples of all of the cities and towns that we love, and even Fernandina. You think about what you see in downtown that everyone loves. Fernandina was not the original Fernandina. Shacks and shanties and sheds. And they were, no, before that it was actually trees and wildlife. And then people came and they did things. And so it changed over time, gradually. Now the problem is, I think the reason why people have a reaction to growth and development today is that it happens at an industrial scale. It wasn't one little building at a time. Now I've got a second story, they add it onto the side. Now we come in and it's like the bulldozers come and the big buildings pop up, and the change happens so quickly. It's not like the terrible analogy to use in this meeting, but it's not like the frog in the pot of boiling water, right? And it slowly changes over time. You don't realize that it's changed, and now it's not so bad. The few times, and historically, we had big changes. We're like, hey, let's build this Eiffel Tower. We're like, oh my God, this is terrible. It's going to ruin everything. The city's going to be terrible now. And now it's this landmark. I have no illusion that a landmark will be built, and this will become the new postcard for Amelia Island. Great job. But nonetheless, as you all are considering your feelings about growth and to new people and to new neighbors and new friends, keep in mind, just remember, you were once the people that were being protested against. And so, again, because I work for cities, I have to have those conversations all the time. And so I'm sorry, I don't have to ask her, like, I can't believe you just said that out loud. But I think it's fair, right? It's a fair thing to say, yes.
Well, that's good. We all kind of understand that. But, well, I was thinking, when you were talking about, only having 25 feet between wetlands, I think that the word that's missing there is minimum. Sure, you could have 50 feet, but at least 25. And also the other thing that I was thinking about concerning buffers and such, I would hope to see a huge buffer between Parkway and where you start building, so that when people are coming into the island, they still see the trees. Yeah, because they don't always do that.
It's like a gateway. We've heard people say a gateway up to the island. I think that's important. One of the things that I've been looking at in response to that is, there are places that have these kind of vegetated rural, parkways that are even more lovely than the ones you have here. And something like some of the Charleston, that is amazing, highways and stuff. And so looking at, what are the differences there? One of the things that I've noticed is that you all have you were responsible for road. The trees are pushed back pretty far from the road, whereas in a lot of other places that have these sort of beautiful scenic roads, there are some trees closer and actually get over things. And so I don't know if we have the ability to improve it and make it even more lovely, but I think to your point, it's definitely nice, and there's not a lot of places like that around here that.
Well, aesthetically, yes, and even for any residents that are there where you're going to be building, it'll help with noise. Just saying, and we do have Canopy Road. If you drive down a little bit further towards Paris Theater, Plantation, there is a near trail.
Nice. And also the ditch, you have the ditch along there. We talk about this every day. My thought is that, and this ties back in the conservation stuff, maybe there are things that we can do to create or improve habitat. Like right now you have a drainage ditch, and people are like, the drainage ditch is an empty patch, right? And so it's kind of like, but if it were created in a wetland where you think it was okay, and it was like now additional habitat that's created. And so we're looking at sort of our green infrastructure, green network, having sustainable stormwater, all of those kind of things as part of it, where we can create, and it's just like at that point, it's like a ribbon habitat is not as good as a large wetland in the wilderness, probably not. But is it better than a ditch that's with the roads and ditch and all that stuff? Probably is. So those are some of the things we're trying to figure out how to incorporate.
Getting back to your point previously about trying to shame everyone here into not wanting more residents on the island, I think one of the reasons for that is because we're so clearly near a breaking point. I don't think this is a conversation of not in my backyard, or I don't like people, or get away from me. It's that to live on this island is to see daily the sand going through the hourglass and feel that rope slipping through your hands, and that sense of place you talk about. Once it's gone, it's gone. And every little piece like this is contributing to the wetness in that napkin that is holding your bunch of grapes. And one time it's going to be too much. So I know what you're trying to say, and I feel that way too. I don't want to be the guy who says, I can move here and then no one else. That's not me. But don't shame people into thinking that we're trying to exclude people for no good reason. The reason is that this island's carrying capacity for sewage and public services and water and traffic and everything else is right there, man. And another 400 houses in that neighborhood, maybe that is the breaking point, where you get there and it is total gridlock, and there are hours in the day you just can't go there anymore because you can't get around. That's people's concern about welcoming more people to this island. At what point does the back break and it just can't support all these people anymore?
Fair enough. And just to be clear, I wasn't indicating that there's no reason for the concern. I didn't mean to say that. I always think about it when we have these discussions. And a lot of times we are working in places that aren't sensitive like this, and it's the same conversation. But I think it's a fair point. And also too, knowing that you all have some pretty good protections in place, more than most places, in order to study impacts and mitigate impacts, and all of those things. It doesn't change, the overall that there will be impacts. So I think it's not lost on me. I think it's the perspective.
Question about the zoning changes.
Yeah.
And maybe Mr. Lundvich could answer this. I don't know. So before you get annexed into the city, could it be a contingency that there has to be 50% of conservation in order for us to annex you into the city? Could that be a thing? Can the city dictate the amount of percentage of conservation land before granting them
No,
zoning?
we cannot.
Can't do that.
We cannot. It's privately owned property.
Okay.
It's zoned commercial.
Okay.
They have to follow the land development code.
Okay.
They have to follow the future land use map. And of course, they have to follow all the building code and the restrictions that come with it.
But as you guys are amending your zoning, I think in the future, you can put those protections in place. A lot of places we write the zoning for to have requirements for a certain percentage.
So it's kind of a two-step process. You can get annexed in, and when you annex in, then you determine what your land use code and your zoning code will be, depending on what y'all ask for. But then once you do that, because of the size of this, in all probability, the site plan will then be managed as a planned unit development of PUD. And when you do a PUD, you can do a lot of negotiation, because all of the issues like setbacks and height and roads, all of that is up for negotiation to a large degree. And so that's when you would have an opportunity to say to the developer, I want this land here to be made conservation, or I want you to do this. I want you to pay this much money to do this to a street. And so that's when that negotiation starts with the planning department and the building department. And that usually takes a while because this is a big project. There'll be a lot of give and take. I'm sorry?
Who would be the declarants on the flood?
The developer.
Okay.
And then once all of that's worked out, then the PUD comes in front of the planning advisory board and then eventually comes in front of the city commission. So there's a long approval process. And then you start with individual site plans, mostly for, like, if you were going to put individual housing, and you start working through that. So there is a process to get to something that is unique to this place, but it is a multi-step process.
So like with the developers, the people here today decide they want to do a development or whatever. Like, they would be the departments, and then like the city would come in and consult with them on what their specific.
Kelly, do you want to talk a little bit about?
Everything that you said that is accurate. So with a plan unit development, you have a lot more room for negotiation of some of our technical standards, but there are also some technical components when you qualify to act as a plan unit development. And in there are certain requirements for open space that it sounds like you're looking into already and thinking about those requirements. But it is a process, and I know that we talked about this previously, that we would anticipate full integration of all of the properties that are already in the city, and at the same time consider the land use and zoning. With the zoning just being about the energy and development and the overlay that really talks through the technical detail of where they're going to deviate from our code, where they're going to question, and then we're able to get improvements that are beyond what we would typically see under conventional zones.
And then all of that goes through public comment.
Yeah.
So there's plenty of opportunity for the public to come to planning advisory board and hear the applicant's presentation and give public comments. Eventually, the PAB will vote up or down. And then if we vote it up, it goes to the, either way, it goes to the city commission. Either way, it goes to the city commission. And then there'll be another whole round of public comment from the city commission. So there's plenty of opportunity for everyone to comment. And then you'll be able to comment on something that's very specific, which is what we've not been able to, you know, I wish somebody would pull out all their monopoly houses and hotels and stuff, and let's just put them on this plot, because my heart thinks that you already got that somewhere in the back pocket. And, you know, let's just go ahead and see what's possible, but we're not going to do that over these 5 days.
Yes, we will.
So, well,
Monday night.
we'll see Monday night, when you pull out all your monopoly hotels.
So what is the
houses.
likelihood that that will be the process moving forward? Is that something that everyone's planning to do here, like do a plan unit development?
I think that's what I understand we would do, yes.
What is your time frame? Like, what are you looking at from when you first break ground and start?
Break ground, I don't have the ability to predict because I don't know enough yet about the timing of the process that we go through. As I understand what we need to have done in order to be ready to start the process, I would think it's early fall, probably, before we could get to that point.
Next year, fall.
No, not for groundbreaking. I'm sorry, to start the zoning or the annexation land use, to start that would be perhaps this fall at the earliest, I think, early fall at the earliest.
September, October.
And that's still a guess. You know, once we finish this process, and then have more formal conversations with Kelly and her staff and other people in the city, we'll know a little bit better, but that's just my guess. And if we started then, I would say it's probably a year anyway before any kind of construction could start.
In terms of timing, a typical land use zoning change is about 4 up to 6 months. And something that is as large scale a project like this, where you have the site development and our technical review process, that you're also trying to bundle into it, so you have some level of surety when it moves forward through that process. That is going to extend the time frame beyond 6 months, probably closer to the 8-month mark, just so that you have everything put together in a well-formed package, so that it's very clear what is being presented publicly.
So to help people understand, so Amelia Park, y'all know Amelia Park, was a PUD. So that's an example of a PUD. The lot lines are not normal, the setbacks are not normal, you know, the tiny little front yards. That's an example of the kind of things you do in a PUD, a planned unit development. And Kelly, do you remember, like, from when that started until they actually started breaking ground? What was the time frame?
So that was the early mid-90s.
Yeah. But it was, you know, it takes a good long time to do that kind of negotiation and get all the moving parts lined up so that everyone is in agreement. We can get the city commission to approve it or not approve it, depending on what the feeling is at the time. And so that's just an example of what a planned unit development could look like and the processes that you go through.
Yeah, and with projects like this too, there's an additional complexity to it. That's what we're trying to do, special things and things that the community's interested in, things we're interested in. So that actually makes it take a little bit longer than even just a normal project as well. Because you can't rush it. And when we're presenting it, there's so much nuance to what we're trying to accomplish that we need to make sure that our materials clear and represent what it is.
And the planning advisory board has the ability to do workshops. So we could have workshops where this is all we talked about. We could take public comment. The developers would be there. Y'all can ask them a million questions. So there's plenty of opportunity for public comment and public input. And everything is publicly noticed. So you will see it in the newspaper and you'll see it on Facebook and all the places that we normally public notice things. Plenty of opportunity for input.
And I think the
And
only
comment.
reason that you're not seeing anything on our pages yet is rather than starting that negotiation conversation when we already have a design and we start that process, we're starting that this week where we didn't max out the site and then we start the negotiation. We're starting a conversation here so that when we get to the public comment, we don't have a maxed out site that you need to come try to dwindle down to get to the conservation and the parks and this and that. We're trying so that we're not in that typical process, so that we're all kind of more in agreement as we go into it.
Well, typically what happens, developers come in and they say, okay, well, here's how many units we need to have. We know that the community's gonna want a pound of flesh, so let's go in and ask for a bunch more than we actually need or want. And then they're gonna come in and extract it, and they're gonna feel good if they took something away from us, and so we get to where we want to be in the first place. Fine, right? But it's all theater at that point, and it's all contentious. you
Right.
know? And
It is.
so it's like, right.
Yeah.
That's just
Ask for the horse, get the dog. But we don't want to play that game with you
From my
guys. That's not fun.
perspective, at the end of the day, what happens is people just sort of all lose enough equally that no one feels like they've lost more than the next person. And I know it's hard, again, you tell them, I think we got it all figured out already, but it's just not how we do it. And we found that this works, the way that, to hear what you're looking for. We have the possibility of actually creating the best version of a plan that you might want to see if you have to see a plan by talking to you, rather than just going in like, oh, here's what we think they want, or here's what Charles needs, and hopefully we can convince him to like it. And so it's I know it's different. As I said in the opening presentation, this suspend disbelief for a little bit. And with the amount of work we're going to show you on Monday night, you'll probably say, see, I told you, there's no way you did all that work this week. And one thing I just realized too, it's actually more difficult to convince people that we aren't coming with something in our back pocket, because we this year moved to doing all our work digitally on the iPad. So you literally don't even see the drawings on the table, and so I'm like sketching on my iPad. So if you see me doing that, that's what I'm doing. You're welcome. You can look over my shoulder, but
yeah, and the entire process is open to the public. Every morning at 9 o'clock till 7 o'clock at night. And sorry, but we did not come in with a plan. That was Brian's instructions from the beginning. We just had these concepts about what we think the market opportunity here might be. And so if you want to come camp out here from 9 to 7 for the next 2 days and spend that time with us.
Brian sketches, right, by hand.
yeah, he does sketch.
Yep.
Yeah, so
And
you'll
our
see this
illustrator's
start to
over
take
there, so
shape
he's
based
probably the
on
most fun
input we
person to
get
watch.
here.
I heard the first concept yesterday.
And believe me, it makes me about as anxious as you could possibly imagine to be in this position of not knowing exactly what we're going to have here at the end.
You
I'd
said you
love
wanted
to
do
have
something
turned this
different at
upside
this point
down.
of your career, right? So I'm giving you all your dreams come true.
Do you have enough space for Monday night for the amount of people that you anticipate wanting to see what happens on Monday night?
I hope. I mean, this room, when we did the opening presentation, we had chairs, tables and stuff back, and they come close to filling it up. So I hope we have to put that as a problem. I think they can bring more chairs.
Yeah, this room will seat like 300 theater style, so.
So, all right. Thank you all. I really appreciate it. Next meeting is at 1 o'clock, about community character and design.
Well,
I